The dust kicked up by the wagon wheels settled like a shroud over the small figure left standing at the crossroads. Sarah May clutched the worn leather satchel containing everything she owned, a faded dress, her mother's silver locket, and $3 in crumpled bills. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the endless prairie, painting the horizon in shades of amber and despair. "Don't you come back, you hear?" Her father's voice still echoed in her ears, weak but venomous. "I got no use for a burden like you. Should have sent you away when your mama died." The consumption had taken more than his lungs. It had poisoned whatever love might have remained in his heart. Sarah May had nursed him through sleepless nights, spooning broth between his cracked lips, reading scripture by candlelight. Yet in his final weeks, he'd looked at her with nothing but resentment, as if her very existence reminded him of failures he couldn't bear to face. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. At 19, Sarah May had never been more than 10 miles from the small homestead where she'd been born. Now, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, she began walking toward the town of Redemption Creek, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. The town materialized like a mirage as the sun began its descent. Wooden buildings lined a single dirt road, their facades weathered by countless storms. The saloon's bat-wing doors swung lazily in the breeze, and somewhere a piano played a melancholy tune. Sarah May's stomach cramped with hunger, but she couldn't bring herself to spend her precious few dollars on food. She found shelter that first night in the livery stable, curled up in an empty stall with only horse blankets for warmth. The stable boy, a kind-faced Mexican youth named Miguel, discovered her the next morning. "Señorita, you cannot stay here," he whispered, glancing nervously toward the stable owner's quarters. "Señor Patterson, he will not understand. I have nowhere else to go," Sarah May replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Miguel's eyes softened with recognition. He knew the look of someone with no place in the world. "There is work at the Blackwood Ranch. Hard work, but Señor Blackwood, he is different. Fair, but feared." The name sent a chill through the stable. Even Sarah May, isolated as she'd been, had heard whispers of James Blackwood, the cattle baron who'd built an empire from nothing, whose word was law across 3 counties. Men spoke his name with a mixture of respect and terror. "He don't take kindly to strangers," Miguel continued, "but his housekeeper, Señora Elena, she has a good heart. Maybe," as if summoned by their conversation, the thunder of hoofbeats filled the morning air. Through the stable doors, Sarah May watched as a group of riders approached, dust-covered men with hard faces and harder eyes. At their head rode a figure that commanded attention without effort. James Blackwood sat his black stallion like he'd been born in the saddle. Even from a distance, Sarah May could see the authority in his bearing, the way the other men deferred to his slightest gesture. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his steel-gray eyes. "Miguel," Blackwood's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Ready my horse. We ride to the northern pasture." "See, Señor Blackwood, right away." As Miguel hurried to comply, Sarah May pressed herself deeper into the shadows. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A loose board creaked under her weight, and suddenly those steel-gray eyes were fixed on her hiding place. "Who's there?" Blackwood's voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Sarah May stepped into the light, her chin raised despite the fear coursing through her veins. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who refused to cower. "I'm Sarah May Whitmore," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm looking for work." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Blackwood's men shifted restlessly in their saddles, but their boss remained perfectly still, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're Ezra Whitmore's daughter," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Sarah May nodded, surprised he knew her father's name. "Heard he passed. There was no sympathy in his voice, but no cruelty either. Just a statement of fact. Yes, sir. 3 days ago, Blackwood dismounted with fluid grace, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Up close, Sarah May could see the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened as he considered her words. You got any experience with cattle? Horses? Some. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not afraid of hard work. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. No, I don't imagine you are. He turned to his men. Right ahead. I'll catch up. As the riders disappeared in a cloud of dust, Blackwood studied Sarah May with those penetrating eyes. She felt exposed, as if he could see straight through to her soul. Elena could use help in the house, he said finally. Pays fair, room and board included. But I run a tight operation. No tolerance for laziness or lies. I understand. Do you? He stepped closer, and Sarah May caught the scent of leather and sage. This isn't charity, Miss Whitmore. You earn your keep, or you find yourself back on that road. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. For just a moment, she saw past the hard exterior to something deeper, a loneliness that matched her own, carefully hidden behind walls of authority and reputation. I won't let you down, she said quietly. Blackwood nodded once, then swung back into his saddle. Miguel will bring you to the ranch. Elena will show you what needs doing. As he rode away, Sarah May felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. She didn't know it yet, but James Blackwood had just made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The Blackwood Ranch sprawled across the horizon like a small kingdom, its boundaries marked by endless miles of fence and the distant shapes of grazing cattle. The main house rose from the prairie like a fortress, its wraparound porch and tall windows speaking of prosperity, hard-won and carefully guarded. Elena Morales met them at the kitchen door, her weathered face creased with curiosity and concern. She was a woman of perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. So, she said, looking Sarah May up and down, you are the one Senor Blackwood spoke of. Yes, ma'am. Sarah May Whitmore. Elena's expression softened slightly. I knew your mother. Good woman. Come, I will show you your room. As they walked through the house, Sarah May marveled at the solid furniture, the thick rugs, the sense of permanence that seemed to emanate from every board and beam. It was a home built to last, to shelter and protect, everything her father's ramshackle homestead had never been. You will help with the cooking, the cleaning, the mending, Elena explained, as they climbed the narrow stairs to the servants' quarters. Senor Blackwood, he is not difficult, but he expects things done properly. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the endless prairie. Sarah May set down her satchel and turned to find Elena watching her with knowing eyes. You have nowhere else to go, the older woman said gently. No, ma'am. Then you will work hard and you will find your place here. Senor Blackwood, he understands what it means to have nothing. He will not turn away someone willing to earn their keep. That night, as Sarah May lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep, she thought about the cattle baron's words and the brief glimpse of something vulnerable in his eyes. She didn't know his story yet, but she recognized the signs. The careful distance, the walls built high against the world. Perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, they were both searching for the same thing, a place to belong, a family to call their own. And perhaps in this vast Texas landscape, they might find it together. Walls built from scars. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, and Sarah May was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room. 3 weeks had passed since James Blackwood had given her sanctuary, and she'd thrown herself into her work with a determination that impressed even Elena. Mija, the housekeeper had said just yesterday, you work like you're trying to outrun something. Sarah May hadn't answered, but Elena wasn't wrong. Every scrubbed floor, every mended shirt, Every perfectly prepared meal was proof of her worth, evidence that she deserved the roof over her head and the food on her plate. The kitchen was already warm when she arrived, Elena having started the fire for breakfast. The two women worked in comfortable silence, preparing meals for the dozen ranch hands who would soon fill the long table in the dining hall. "Senor Blackwood rides to Austin today," Elena mentioned as she kneaded dough for biscuits. "Business with the railroad. He will be gone 3 days." Sarah May nodded, trying to ignore the strange disappointment that settled in her chest. In the weeks since her arrival, she'd seen the ranch owner only in passing, a tall figure on horseback riding out at dawn, returning at dusk with dust on his clothes and weariness in his eyes. Their conversations had been brief, professional, but she found herself watching for him nonetheless. "He works too hard," Elena continued, her voice carrying the concern of someone who'd known him for years. "Always pushing, always building, never stopping to rest." "Why?" Sarah May asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't her place to pry, but Elena seemed to understand her curiosity. "His father built this ranch from nothing, then lost it all to bad investments and worse men. James was barely 20 when he had to start over, rebuild everything from the ground up. He swore he'd never be that vulnerable again." The explanation settled something in Sarah May's mind, the careful distance, the walls he kept between himself and others. She understood that kind of protection, the fear of losing what little you'd managed to claim. The morning passed in its usual rhythm until a commotion in the yard drew both women to the window. A rider was approaching fast, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. Sarah May recognized him as Tom Bradley, one of Blackwood's most trusted men. "Elena," Tom called as he dismounted. "Where's the boss? He left for Austin an hour ago. What's wrong?" Tom's face was grim. "Rustlers hit the north pasture. Took maybe 50 head, killed 2 of our boys." Sarah May felt the blood drain from her face. She'd grown fond of the ranch hands who ate at her table each morning, their easy banter and genuine kindness a balm to her wounded spirit. "Which boys?" Elena's voice was steady, but Sarah May could see her hands trembling. "Young Pete and Charlie Morrison. Found them at dawn." Elena crossed herself, whispering a prayer in Spanish. Sarah May closed her eyes, remembering Pete's shy smile and Charlie's terrible jokes. They'd been barely older than herself, full of dreams and plans for the future. "We need to get word to Mr. Blackwood," Tom continued, "and we need to prepare for trouble. These weren't ordinary rustlers. They knew exactly where to hit, when the guards would be lightest." As Tom rode off to gather the remaining men, Sarah May found herself thinking about the careful empire James Blackwood had built. In a single night, cracks had appeared in his fortress, reminders that no amount of wealth or power could protect against every threat. The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. The ranch hands took turns standing guard, their easy camaraderie replaced by grim vigilance. Sarah May threw herself into her work, preparing extra food, mending clothes with nervous energy, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. It was near sunset on the second day when the thunder of hoofbeats announced Blackwood's return. Sarah May watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted, his face a mask of controlled fury. Tom Bradley met him in the yard, and even from a distance, she could see the tension in both men's postures. 50 head, she heard Tom report. Maybe more. They knew exactly where to strike. Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Inside job? Has to be. Question is who?" Sarah May turned away from the window, not wanting to eavesdrop further. But as she resumed her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The safety she'd begun to feel at the ranch suddenly seemed fragile, temporary. Later that evening, as she was finishing the dinner dishes, Elena approached with worry etched across her features. "Senor Blackwood wants to see you in his study," she said quietly. Sarah May's heart lurched. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, mija, but he is different tonight. Careful with your words." The study was a masculine sanctuary of leather-bound books and heavy furniture. James Blackwood stood behind his desk, still wearing his travel clothes, his face illuminated by the warm glow of an oil lamp. When he looked up at her entrance, Sarah May saw something she hadn't expected, exhaustion that went deeper than physical weariness. "You wanted to see me, sir? Sit down, Miss Whitmore." She perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. Blackwood studied her for a long moment, as if weighing his words. "I'm sure you've heard about what happened while I was away." "Yes, sir, I'm sorry about Pete and Charlie." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd known their names, cared enough to mourn them. "This ranch has enemies," he said finally. "Men who'd like nothing better than to see it fail, to see me brought low. What happened wasn't random, it was planned, calculated." Sarah May nodded, not trusting her voice. "I need to know I can trust the people under my roof," he continued. "Completely. Without question." The implication hit her like a physical blow. "You think I think you appeared at a convenient time," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "A stranger with no ties, no history anyone can verify." Sarah May felt tears prick her eyes, but she forced them back. After weeks of feeling like she might finally belong somewhere, she was once again being cast out, suspected, unwanted. "I understand," she said quietly, rising from her chair. "I'll pack my things. Sit down." The command in his voice made her freeze. When she looked at him, she saw something unexpected. Conflict, as if he were fighting some internal battle. "I said I need to know I can trust you," he repeated. "I didn't say I'd decided I couldn't." Sarah May sank back into the chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. Blackwood moved around the desk, leaning against its edge, so he was closer to her. "Tell me about your father, sir." "Ezra Whitmore. What kind of man was he?" The question caught her off guard. "He was hard, especially after my mother died. He blamed me for her death, I think. Said I was a burden, a reminder of what he'd lost. And yet you stayed, cared for him until the end. He was my father." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, even if he never acted like it. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face. "My father was a dreamer," he said finally, "full of grand plans and bigger promises. He built this ranch on borrowed money and borrowed time, always believing the next deal would be the one to make us rich." Sarah May sensed this was not a story he told often, if ever. When the creditors came, he put a gun to his head rather than face what he'd done to his family. Blackwood's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah May could hear the old pain beneath the words. "Left me with nothing but debt and the reputation of being a failure's son. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I rebuilt this place from nothing," he continued. "Every board, every fence post, every head of cattle represents something I earned, something I fought for, and I swore I'd never let anyone take it away again." Sarah May understood now. The walls he'd built weren't just around his property, but around his heart. The fear of loss, of betrayal, of being left with nothing once again. "I didn't come here to hurt you," she said quietly. "I came because I had nowhere else to go." "I know." His admission surprised them both. "Elena vouches for you, says you work harder than anyone she's ever seen, never complain, never ask for more than you're given." "Then why?" "Because I can't afford to be wrong." The words came out harsh, final. "Too many people depend on this place, depend on me. I can't let sentiment cloud my judgment." Sarah May felt something crack inside her chest. "So what happens now?" Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle playing out across his features. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Now you prove me right for trusting you." The relief that flooded through her was so intense it left her dizzy. "You're not sending me away?" "No." He moved back behind his desk, putting distance between them again. "But things are going to change around here. More guards, stricter rules. Everyone will be watched more closely." "I understand." "Do you?" He fixed her with that penetrating stare. "This isn't a game, Miss Whitmore. The men who killed Pete and Charlie won't hesitate to hurt anyone they see as a threat, including you." The warning sent a chill down her spine, but also something else, a recognition that he cared enough to worry about her safety. "I'm not afraid," she said, and meant it. "You should be." But there was something almost like admiration in his voice. "Elena will explain the new security measures. Follow them exactly." "Yes, sir." As she rose to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. "Miss Whitmore?" "Yes, thank you. For caring about Pete and Charlie, for mourning them. It matters." Sarah May nodded, not trusting her voice. As she closed the study door behind her, she realized something had shifted between them. The walls were still there, but perhaps they weren't quite as high as they'd been before. In the kitchen, Elena was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and knowing eyes. "Well?" the older woman asked. "I'm staying." Elena smiled. "Good. He needs people he can trust, even if he's too stubborn to admit it." As Sarah May sipped her coffee, she thought about the pain she'd seen in James Blackwood's eyes, the careful way he held himself apart from the world. They were both wounded, both afraid of being hurt again, but perhaps in protecting each other, they might find a way to heal. Outside, the Texas wind whispered across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of storms to come. But for the first time since her father's death, Sarah May felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had found her place, and she would fight to keep it. When walls began to crumble, the attack came at dawn, 3 weeks after the rustling incident. Sarah May was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when the first gunshot shattered the morning quiet. Elena dropped the plate she was holding, ceramic shards scattering across the floor like fallen stars. "Get down," Elena hissed, pulling Sarah May behind the heavy wooden table. More shots followed, the sharp cracks echoing across the ranch yard. Through the window, Sarah May could see muzzle flashes from the tree line, the shadowy figures of men on horseback. The ranch hands were scrambling for cover, some returning fire from behind water troughs and fence posts. "Where's Mr. Blackwood?" Sarah May whispered. "In the barn with the horses," Elena replied, her face pale but determined. "He always checks them first thing." A bullet shattered the kitchen window, sending glass raining down on their hiding place. Sarah May felt a sharp sting as a shard cut her cheek, but she barely noticed. All her attention was focused on the barn, where she could see the tall figure of James Blackwood moving between the stalls, trying to calm the terrified animals. "He's trapped," she breathed. The attackers had positioned themselves to cut off all routes between the barn and the house. Every time Blackwood tried to move toward cover, a fresh volley of shots drove him back. "Mija, no." Elena grabbed Sarah May's arm as she started to rise. "You cannot help him." But Sarah May was already moving, her mind crystal clear despite the chaos around her. She'd grown up on a ranch, knew every inch of this property from her weeks of work. There was a root cellar that connected to the barn through an underground passage, a relic from the days when Indian raids were a constant threat. She slipped out the back door while Elena called after her in frantic Spanish. The cellar entrance was hidden behind a stand of mesquite trees, its wooden door nearly invisible beneath years of accumulated dirt and debris. The passage was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Sarah May crawled through the musty tunnel, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear the continued gunfire, the shouts of men, the terrified whinnying of horses. She emerged in the barn's tack room, dust and cobwebs clinging to her hair and dress. Through the doorway, she could see Blackwood pressed against a stall door, his rifle ready but his position hopeless. "Mr. Blackwood," she called softly. He spun toward her voice, his eyes wide with disbelief and anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Getting you out." She gestured toward the cellar entrance. "There's a tunnel. It leads back to the house." "I'm not leaving my men. You're no good to them dead." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but they had the desired effect. Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "You first," he said. "No, you're bigger. You'll move slower. I'll cover you." Before he could protest, she'd taken his rifle and positioned herself at the doorway. The weight of the weapon was familiar in her hands. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a gun. "Go," she whispered. Blackwood hesitated for a moment, then dropped to his knees and disappeared into the tunnel. Sarah May counted to 10, then followed, crawling backward so she could watch for pursuit. They emerged in the cellar to find Elena waiting with bandages and water, her face streaked with tears of relief. "Gracias a Dios," she whispered, crossing herself. Above them, the gunfire was beginning to fade. Through the cellar's small window, Sarah May could see riders retreating toward the hills, their mission apparently complete. "Cowards," Blackwood spat, checking his rifle. "Hit and run, just like before." "Anyone hurt?" Sarah May asked. "Tom took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live. Could have been much worse if they'd pressed the attack." As they climbed the stairs back to the kitchen, Sarah May felt Blackwood's eyes on her. When she looked back, she saw something new in his expression, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, more complex. "That was foolish," he said quietly, "and brave. I couldn't just watch you die." The simple honesty of her words seemed to affect him more than any elaborate declaration might have. He stopped walking, his hand reaching out as if to touch her face, then dropping back to his side. "You're bleeding," he said instead, noticing the cut on her cheek. "It's nothing." But he was already reaching for his handkerchief, dabbing gently at the wound. His touch was surprisingly tender, and Sarah May found herself holding her breath, acutely aware of his closeness. "Sarah May," he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. "What you did today, Senor Blackwood," Tom Bradley's voice interrupted from the kitchen doorway. "We need to talk." The moment shattered, and Blackwood stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. But Sarah May had seen what lay beneath it, and the knowledge sent warmth spreading through her chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The wounded were tended, the damage assessed, plans made for increased security. Sarah May threw herself into her work, helping Elena prepare meals for the extra men who would now be stationed around the ranch. It was near sunset when she found herself alone in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes. The events of the morning felt like a dream, but the tender spot on her cheek where Blackwood had touched her was very real. "You saved my life today." She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands and an expression she couldn't quite read on his face. "Anyone would have done the same," she said. "No." He stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. "Not anyone. Most people would have stayed hidden, stayed safe. I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, moving closer. "You're not." The air between them seemed charged with electricity. Sarah May felt her pulse quicken as he reached up to touch her cheek again, his fingers tracing the small bandage Elena had applied. "I could have lost you today," he said quietly. "When I saw you in that tunnel, all I could think was that I'd brought you into danger, that my enemies might hurt you because of me." "James," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. Something shifted in his eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. The careful distance he maintained, the walls he'd built so carefully, began to crumble. "I swore I'd never let anyone get close again," he said. "Never give anyone the power to hurt me. And now I'm terrified," he admitted, "because somewhere along the way you became important to me, more important than I ever intended." Sarah May felt tears prick her eyes. "I know the feeling." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "This is dangerous, Sarah May, for both of us. I don't care. You should. My enemies won't hesitate to use you against me. Then we'll face them together." The simple declaration seemed to break something inside him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest as if she might disappear. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered into her hair. "How to care about someone without losing myself." "We'll figure it out," she said, breathing in the scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. "Together." When he pulled back to look at her, Sarah May saw vulnerability in his eyes that took her breath away. This was the man behind the legend, the scared boy who'd lost everything and built walls to protect what remained of his heart. "I'm not an easy man to love," he warned. "I'm not asking for easy," she replied. "I'm asking for real." He kissed her then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing passion. Sarah May felt the last of her own walls crumble, the fear and loneliness that had defined her life melting away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. James rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we see if we're strong enough to survive what's coming," he said. "Because this isn't over, Sarah May. Today was just the beginning." As if summoned by his words, Tom Bradley's voice called from the yard. "Boss, riders coming in." James tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. But as they looked out the window, they saw it was Sheriff Morrison with a small posse, their faces grim in the fading light. "Trouble," James muttered, but his hand found Sarah May's and squeezed gently. "Stay close to me." As they walked out to meet the sheriff, Sarah May felt the weight of the moment. Everything was changing, the careful balance of their lives shifting like sand in an hourglass. But for the first time since her father's death, she wasn't facing the future alone. Whatever came next, they would meet it together, and perhaps in the crucible of the challenges ahead, they would forge something stronger than either had ever dared to hope for. A love that could weather any storm. A family built not on blood, but on choice, on the decision to stand together against whatever darkness threatened to tear them apart. The sheriff dismounted, his expression grave. "James, we need to talk. It's about the attacks on your ranch. What about them? We know who's behind them. And Sarah May, you're not going to like what I have to tell you." Sarah May felt James's hand tighten around hers, his body tensing for whatever revelation was coming, but she stood straighter, drawing strength from his presence. "Tell us," she said firmly. The sheriff's eyes were full of sympathy and regret. "It's your cousin, Sarah May, Marcus Whitmore. He's been working with a gang of rustlers, feeding them information about ranch security. Claims he's got a legal right to your father's property. Says you stole his inheritance." The words hit Sarah May like a physical blow. Marcus, her father's nephew, the boy she'd grown up with, played with, considered almost a brother. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet could have. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm afraid it's not. We caught one of his men, and he confessed everything. Marcus has been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to strike." James's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "What does he want?" "The ranch," Sheriff Morrison replied. "All of it. He figures if he can drive you out, James, and eliminate Sarah May's claim to her father's land, he can piece together a nice little empire for himself." Sarah May felt the world spinning around her. Everything she'd begun to build, the safety she'd found, the love she'd discovered, all of it threatened by someone she'd once trusted. "He won't succeed," James said, his voice hard as steel. "I won't let him. This is my fight," Sarah May said quietly. "My family, my responsibility." "No." James turned her to face him, his eyes blazing with determination. "You're my family now, and I protect what's mine." The words sent warmth flooding through her, even in the midst of the crisis. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who would stand with her, fight for her, refuse to let her face the darkness by herself. "What do we do?" she asked. "We end this," James replied, "once and for all." As the sheriff outlined his plan and the men prepared for what was to come, Sarah May felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The girl who'd been cast out by her dying father was gone, replaced by a woman who'd found her strength, her purpose, her home. The battle ahead would test everything they'd built together, but Sarah May was no longer afraid. She had found her family, her place in the world, and she would fight to keep it. Blood and redemption. The confrontation came at high noon, like something out of a dime novel. Marcus Whitmore rode into the ranch yard with 6 men at his back, their faces hard and their hands resting on their guns. Sarah May watched from the porch, James beside her as her cousin dismounted with the swagger of a man who believed he held all the cards. Marcus had changed in the years since she'd last seen him. The boy she remembered, quick to laugh, always ready with a joke or a kind word, had been replaced by a man whose eyes held nothing but cold calculation. Success in his rustling operation had made him bold, but it had also made him careless. The confrontation came at high noon, like something out of a dime novel. Marcus Whitmore rode into the ranch yard with 6 men at his back, their faces hard and their hands resting on their guns. Sarah May watched from the porch, James beside her, as her cousin dismounted with the swagger of a man who believed he held all the cards. Marcus had changed in the years since she'd last seen him. The boy she remembered, quick to laugh, always ready with a joke or a kind word, had been replaced by a man whose eyes held nothing but cold calculation. Success in his rustling operation had made him bold, but it had also made him careless. "Hello, cousin," he called out, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "You're looking well. Ranch life seems to agree with you." Sarah May stepped forward, her chin raised despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Marcus, I heard you were behind the attacks." "Attacks?" He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "I prefer to think of them as negotiations, attempts to reach a reasonable settlement. By killing innocent men." James's voice cut through the air like a blade. Pete Morrison and Charlie were barely 20 years old. Marcus's expression didn't change. "Casualties of war, Blackwood? Nothing personal." "Everything about this is personal," Sarah May said, stepping down from the porch. "You were like a brother to me once. How could you do this?" "Brother?" Marcus spat. "Your father made it clear I was nothing but a burden, a mouth to feed when times got hard. He chose you over me, left me with nothing while you inherited his land." "I inherited nothing but debt and heartache," Sarah May replied. "Father died hating me, blaming me for mother's death. There was no inheritance, Marcus. Just pain. Liar." The word exploded from him with such venom that his horse shied away. "That land should have been mine. I'm the male heir, the rightful owner. You're just a woman. You have no business owning property." James stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "She has every right, legal and moral, and she's under my protection." "Your protection?" Marcus laughed again. The great James Blackwood reduced to playing nursemaid to a spinster. How the mighty have fallen. The insult hit its mark, but not in the way Marcus intended. Instead of anger, Sarah May felt a cold clarity settle over her. This man, this stranger wearing her cousin's face, had murdered good men, terrorized innocent people, all for the sake of greed and wounded pride. "You're not the boy I grew up with," she said quietly. "That Marcus had honor, had kindness. What happened to him?" For just a moment something flickered in Marcus's eyes, a ghost of the boy he'd once been, but it was gone so quickly Sarah May wondered if she'd imagined it. "He grew up," Marcus said, "learned that honor doesn't put food on the table or a roof over your head. Learned that in this world you take what you can get, or you get nothing at all. And if I refuse to give you what you want," Marcus's smile was cold as winter, "then I'll take it anyway, starting with your protector here." The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut with a knife. James's men had positioned themselves strategically around the buildings, their weapons ready but not yet drawn. Sheriff Morrison and his deputies were hidden in the barn, waiting for the signal to move. "You're outnumbered, Marcus," Sarah May said, hoping to end this without bloodshed. "The sheriff knows everything. Surrender now, and maybe what? Maybe they'll only hang me instead of drawing and quartering me." Marcus shook his head. "I don't think so, cousin. I've come too far to back down now." His hand moved toward his gun, and everything exploded into chaos. James was faster, his Colt clearing leather in a smooth motion that spoke of years of practice. But Marcus's men were already moving, their own weapons appearing as if by magic. The first shot came from Tom Bradley, positioned on the roof of the bunkhouse. One of Marcus's men spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Then everyone was shooting. The peaceful ranch yard transformed into a battlefield. Sarah May dove for cover behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the chaos, she could see James trading shots with Marcus, both men using the horses as cover. The animals were screaming in terror, adding to the cacophony of gunfire and shouting men. Sheriff Morrison and his deputies burst from the barn, their badges glinting in the afternoon sun. "Drop your weapons," Morrison shouted. "You're surrounded." But Marcus was beyond reason now, his face twisted with rage and desperation. He fired wildly, his bullets going wide, more interested in causing chaos than hitting any specific target. Sarah May saw her chance. While Marcus was focused on James, she slipped from her hiding place and began working her way around the edge of the yard. She had to end this. Too many good men had already died because of her family's sins. "Marcus," she called out, standing in the open despite the danger. "Stop this, please." He turned toward her, his gun swinging in her direction. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Sarah May saw the boy she'd once known in his eyes, the cousin who'd taught her to skip stones and catch fireflies. "It doesn't have to end this way," she said softly. "We can find another solution." "There is no other solution," Marcus replied, but his gun hand was shaking. "Don't you see? I've gone too far to turn back now. I'm a dead man either way." "No, you're not," the sheriff said. "The sheriff said what he needed to say to get me here." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "You think they'll let me live after what I've done? After the men I've killed?" Sarah May felt tears streaming down her face. "Then why? Why continue this madness?" "Because if I'm going to die, I'm taking you with me." His gun steadied, pointing directly at her heart. "If I can't have what should have been mine, then no one can." The shot rang out across the yard, echoing off the buildings and rolling across the prairie like thunder. Sarah May closed her eyes, waiting for the pain, the darkness, but it didn't come. When she opened her eyes, Marcus was on the ground, James standing over him with his smoking Colt in his hand. Her cousin's chest rose and fell rapidly, blood spreading across his shirt, but he was still alive. "You always were too slow on the draw," James said quietly, holstering his weapon. Marcus coughed, blood speckling his lips. Should have killed me." "That's not my choice to make," James replied. "The law will decide your fate." Sheriff Morrison knelt beside the wounded man, checking his injuries. "He'll live to stand trial," he announced. "Shoulder wound, clean through." As the deputies rounded up Marcus's surviving men, Sarah May found herself kneeling beside her cousin. Up close, she could see the pain in his eyes, not just from his wound, but from something deeper, older. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry Father made you feel unwanted. I'm sorry I didn't try harder to stay in touch after Mother died." Marcus turned his head away. "Too late for apologies." "It's never too late," Sarah May insisted. "We're family, Marcus. That has to count for something." "Family," he laughed bitterly. "Family is what got us into this mess in the first place." As the doctor arrived to tend to the wounded, Sarah May stood and walked to where James was watching the proceedings. His face was grim, the weight of what had happened settling over him like a shroud. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "You saved mine first," he replied. "In the tunnel, remember? This is different. You could have killed him, but you didn't." James was quiet for a long moment. "He's your family. Twisted and broken maybe, but still your blood. I couldn't take that choice away from you." Sarah May felt her heart swell with love for this complicated, honorable man. "What happens now?" "Now we rebuild," James said, his arm coming around her shoulders. "We bury our dead, tend our wounded, and we move forward. Together? Together." As the sun began to set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah May felt a chapter of her life closing. The girl who'd been cast out by her dying father was truly gone now, replaced by a woman who'd found her strength, her purpose, her home. The battle was over, but the war for her soul had been won long before the first shot was fired. She'd found her family, not in blood but in choice, in the man who stood beside her, in the woman who'd welcomed her into the kitchen, In the ranch hands who'd accepted her as one of their own, Marcus would face justice for his crimes, but Sarah May found she could forgive him. The boy she'd once known had been lost long ago, consumed by bitterness and greed, but the memory of who he'd been would live on, a reminder that even the closest bonds could be broken by pain and poor choices. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words coming out before she could stop them. James turned to look at her, surprise and something deeper flickering in his gray eyes. "Sarah May, I know it's complicated," she continued. "I know we both have scars, both have reasons to be afraid, but I love you, James Blackwood, and I'm not afraid to say it." He was quiet for so long that Sarah May began to worry she'd made a mistake. Then he smiled, really smiled, not the careful expression he usually wore, but something genuine and warm. "I love you too," he said quietly, "more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, more certain, full of promises for the future. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. "Marry me," James said suddenly. Sarah May's eyes widened. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "I know it's sudden, I know we haven't talked about it, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. You've become part of this place, part of me. I want to make it official." "James, I know I'm not easy to live with," he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know I have walls, that I'm too protective, too controlling sometimes, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." Sarah May felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy now, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll spend my life with you. Yes to all of it." This time when he kissed her, Sarah May felt the last of her fears melt away. She'd found her home, her family, her future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It never was in this harsh land, but they would face it together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah May thought about the journey that had brought her here. Cast out by her dying father, she'd wandered lost and alone until she'd found sanctuary in the most unlikely place. The cattle baron who'd terrified others had become her protector, her partner, her love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight, in the circle of James's arms, Sarah May felt nothing but peace. She'd found her place in the world and nothing would ever take it away from her again. Home at last, 6 months later, Sarah May stood in the same kitchen where she'd first found refuge, but everything had changed. The simple wooden table where she'd once eaten alone now bore the weight of wedding preparations, flowers from Elena's garden, ribbons in shades of cream and gold, and the delicate lace of her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit. "Mija, hold still," Elena scolded gently, pinning the final alterations to the dress. "You fidget like a nervous colt." "I can't help it," Sarah May laughed, her hands smoothing the silk fabric. "I never thought I'd have a wedding, let alone one like this." Through the window she could see the preparations taking place in the yard. Tables had been set up under the old oak tree, its branches strung with lanterns that would glow like stars when evening came. The entire community had turned out to help. Ranch hands, townspeople, even some of the neighboring ranchers who'd once viewed James with suspicion. "Senor Blackwood, he is a good man," Elena said, her voice warm with affection. "Stubborn, yes, proud, certainly, but good. He will take care of you." "I know." Sarah May's smile was radiant. "And I'll take care of him." The transformation in James over the past months had been remarkable. The walls he'd built so carefully around his heart had crumbled piece by piece, revealing the man beneath, still strong, still protective, but capable of tenderness Sarah May had never imagined. A knock at the kitchen door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see one of the ranch hands with a question about the preparations. Instead, Sheriff Morrison stepped inside, his hat in his hands, and an expression she couldn't quite read on his weathered face. "Sheriff," Sarah May said, her stomach tightening with sudden worry, "is everything all right?" Well, that depends on how you look at it, Morrison replied. I've got news about your cousin. Sarah May's hand went to her throat. Marcus had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, a fate that had seemed both just and merciful given the severity of his crimes. What about him? He's dead. The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena gasped, crossing herself and whispering a prayer in Spanish. Sarah May sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. How? She whispered. Knife fight in the prison yard, Morrison said gently. Happened 3 days ago. Word just reached me this morning. Sarah May closed her eyes, feeling a complex mix of emotions wash over her. Grief for the boy Marcus had once been, relief that his threat was finally ended, and a strange sense of closure she hadn't expected. I'm sorry, Sarah May, Morrison continued. I know he was family despite everything. Thank you for telling me, she managed. Does James know? I told him first. He's the one who asked me to break the news to you gentle-like. Of course he had. Even on their wedding day, James was thinking of her, protecting her from unnecessary pain. The knowledge filled her with warmth despite the sadness of Morrison's news. There's something else, the sheriff said, reaching into his coat pocket. Marcus left this for you. Prison chaplain said he wrote it the night before he died. The letter was written on cheap paper in Marcus's familiar handwriting, though it was shakier than she remembered. Sarah May's hands trembled as she unfolded it. Sarah May, I know I got no right to ask your forgiveness, not after what I'd done, but I wanted you to know that the boy you remember, the one who taught you to skip stones, he was real. He just got lost somewhere along the way. I've been thinking a lot in this place about choices and consequences and the man I became. You deserved better from me. You deserved the cousin who would have protected you, not the one who tried to destroy you. I heard you're getting married to Blackwood. I'm glad. He's a good man, better than me by a long shot. He'll give you the family you always deserved, the one I was too broken to be part of. Be happy, cousin. Be everything I couldn't be. Marcus. Sarah May read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, she found Elena and Sheriff Morrison watching her with concern. He found some peace at the end, she said quietly. I think that's all any of us can hope for. Morrison nodded. I'll leave you to your preparations then. Congratulations, Sarah May. You've earned your happiness. After he left, Elena wrapped Sarah May in a warm embrace. Cry if you need to, mija, but don't let the past steal your joy today. I won't, Sarah May promised, wiping her eyes. Marcus is at peace now, and so am I. The ceremony took place at sunset, with the entire ranch community gathered under the oak tree. Sarah May walked down the makeshift aisle on Tom Bradley's arm, the foreman having volunteered to give her away in the absence of any other family. James waited for her at the altar, resplendent in his best suit, his gray eyes shining with love and pride. When their eyes met, Sarah May felt her heart skip a beat. This man, this strong, complicated, wonderful man, was about to become her husband. The preacher, a circuit rider who'd known James since childhood, spoke of love and commitment, of the bonds that tie two souls together through joy and sorrow. But Sarah May barely heard the words. All her attention was focused on James, on the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Do you, James Blackwood, take Sarah May Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do, James said, his voice strong and clear. And do you, Sarah May Whitmore, take James Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do, Sarah May whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The rings were simple gold bands, but they felt like the most precious jewels as they slipped them onto each other's fingers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James's kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promises for the future. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Sarah May had ever experienced. Music filled the air as the ranch hands brought out fiddles and harmonicas, their rough voices joining in songs of love and joy. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by every woman in the county, and the lanterns strung through the oak tree's branches cast everything in a warm, golden glow. "Happy?" James asked as they swayed together during their first dance as husband and wife. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah May replied, her head resting against his chest. "Good," he murmured into her hair, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." As the evening wore on, Sarah May found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each person sharing their own story of how James had helped them, protected them, given them a chance when no one else would. She began to understand that the man she'd married wasn't just a cattle baron. He was the heart of this community, the one people turned to in times of trouble. "He's been alone too long," Elena said, appearing at Sarah May's elbow with a cup of punch. "You've brought light back into his life." "He's brought light into mine, too," Sarah May replied, watching as James laughed at something Tom Bradley had said. "We saved each other, I think. See, that is how the best marriages work. Two broken pieces that fit together to make something whole." As the night deepened and the guests began to drift away, Sarah May found herself standing with James on the porch of their home, for it was truly their home now, not just his. The ranch stretched out before them, peaceful in the moonlight, the cattle lowing softly in the distance. "Any regrets?" James asked, his arm around her waist. "Only one," Sarah May said, and felt him tense. "I regret that it took so long for us to find each other." James relaxed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We found each other when we were ready, when we were both strong enough to let someone in. And now we build something new, together." Sarah May thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain of her father's rejection, the fear and loneliness of those first days on the road, the gradual building of trust and love that had led to this moment. Every hardship, every tear, every moment of despair had been worth it to arrive at this place of belonging. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood," James said softly. "I love you too, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, marveling at how natural the name sounded. As they stood together in the Texas moonlight, Sarah May felt the last pieces of her broken heart heal. She'd been cast out by her dying father, but she'd found something infinitely more precious. A family built on choice rather than blood, love rather than obligation. The cattle baron had indeed become the family she'd lost, but more than that, he'd helped her become the woman she was meant to be. Strong, confident, beloved. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd been abandoned at a crossroads. She was Sarah May Blackwood, wife, partner, and equal to one of the most powerful men in Texas. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities and challenges. There would be droughts and storms, good years and bad, moments of joy and sorrow, but they would face it all together, two souls who'd found their home in each other. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night wind whispered across the prairie, Sarah May knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She'd found her place in the world, and nothing would ever take it away from her again. The girl who'd been cast out had become a woman who'd found her way home, and in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by the family she'd chosen, Sarah May Blackwood was finally completely, perfectly at peace. Perfectly. In the distance, a coyote howled at the moon, its voice carrying across the vast Texas landscape. But Sarah May wasn't afraid of the wilderness anymore. She'd found her sanctuary, her refuge, her forever home in the heart of the man who stood beside her. The cattle baron had given her everything she'd never dared to dream of: love, security, belonging, and a future bright with promise. And in return, she'd given him the one thing his wealth and power couldn't buy: a heart willing to love him exactly as he was, walls and all. Together, they would write a new chapter in the story of the Blackwood Ranch, one filled with love, laughter, and the kind of happiness that comes only to those brave enough to open their hearts to the possibility of forever. The end.